This is the Boston 13, and it's a pretty good shoe, but is that enough to make it a good Boston? And what does that even mean? It's time to lace up the Boston 13 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm an elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys about the Adidas Boston 13. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I purchased myself. No one sent it to me. However, regardless of how a shoe makes it to my desk, no one is paying me to make this video or to put their brand in this video. And no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage, my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Boston 13 and let's start with the specs. The headline spec for this year is that there is 13.8% more Light Strike Pro in this shoe versus the Boston of last year. So let's take a look at this shoe to see what that means. There is Light Strike, which is a daily training foam that's on the bottom. That's this grayish material. And then above that, there is a race caliber foam, which is a Light Strike Pro. And in between these two layers to help stabilize everything, there is Energy Rods 2.0. A lot of shoes that are kind of built similarly to the Boston 13 will use like a plastic plate, maybe not necessarily a carbon fiber plate, but it can be a carbon fiber plate. And the Energy Rods kind of look like a plate, but they also, instead of having a solid plate, have kind of these rods that go underneath the bones of your foot or kind of map to the bones of your foot and provide support in that way. And there is also a more dense piece of plastic to provide some stability, and you can see a little window on the side of the shoe. Now, on the bottom of the shoe, we see a couple of things here that are new for the Boston 13. One is that we're seeing light traction, which is a material we first saw on the Adios Pro 4. They're bringing that down into the Boston 13 now. And we are also seeing that there is a notch cut out on the medial side right underneath the arch of the foot. So you could see a little bit better into those energy rods, but also that's going to take away some of that light strike that was underneath the shoe, underneath the arch. And that's going to make the shoe bend a little bit easier, but also for people who have some stability issues, it could make the shoe a little bit less stable. For me, I tend to like it when there is a little notch cut out underneath the arch of the shoe because it makes the shoe a little bit more flexible, which is something that I generally like. Moving to the upper, we have some changes here as well. The main takeaway for me is that there's a lot more padding. They're making this a lot more kind of daily training oriented, at least in terms of the way that they're dressing this upper. The tongue is more padded than it was last year, and last year there was only a couple of bumper pads on each side of the heel. This year the foam cushioning goes all the way around. It's still relatively restrained and edited back here, but there is more padding now than there was last year. Another big thing for me, a huge thing for me that I'm going to talk about a lot more when we get into what it's like to actually run in this shoe, is that another change looks very subtle, but for me, it makes a big deal, and that's in the shape of the heels. Last year's Boston 12, I thought was very stout with elbows out. It flared quite a bit in the heel area, making the landing very stable, but also making the entire shoe a lot more clunky for me, at least in the way that I run and the way that my foot hits the ground. This year, it's still pretty wide back here. While the landing pad is very similar in terms of like the footprint of the rubber that's on the outsole, the amount of flaring that's on the heel here is just a little bit less. It's tightened up just a little bit, which for me makes the shoe a bit more nimble. And again, combined with the notch cut out in here, it makes the whole ride a little bit more, at least on paper, exciting of a shoe to run in. All told, these changes added up to a reduction in weight, which is something that I always like to see. This year's shoe comes in at a measured weight for my US men's size 9 reference size of 8.9 ounces or 254 grams. Now that we talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what the shoe is like on the road. The Boston 13 is nice. It's a pretty good shoe. I think it's still a bit too much on the firm side, and I feel like they're going to great lengths to stabilize this shoe, which I think kind of is holding the shoe back. It feels like the shoe is always kind of fighting me just a little bit. But in the overall scheme of things, I feel like for what Adidas is trying to make in the Boston 13, I feel like they've done a pretty good job of it. Personally, for me, it takes me kind of a mile or two every time I put the shoe on to get into a rhythm with this shoe. But after that, I get into some relatively carefree miles. I was able to do some recovery running in this shoe, just considering that is a pretty big shoe with a lot of cushy Lightstrike Pro foam in it and a comfortable padded upper. I took it for those recovery miles, and it's okay. If you like a stiffer recovery shoe, a higher stack, thicker recovery shoe, then I think this could really work for that purpose for you. Personally, I like things to be a lot mushier when it comes to my recovery shoes. And for my daily training, which I think primarily that's what the Boston 13 is designed for, I feel like it does a pretty good job in like a workhorse shoe kind of way. It doesn't feel flashy underfoot to me. It doesn't feel like it's trying to vie for my attention with every step. It just feels like a set it and forget it kind of shoe, a shoe that's going to be eager to put in the miles without too many complaints. And then the thing that I had the hardest time with in this shoe, and where a lot of cognitive dissonance comes to me with what I think the Boston 13 should be and what the Boston 13 is when I try to pick up the pace in it, whether I'm doing strides or just doing some up-tempo running. The shoe to me feels like it's a little bit sluggish, notwithstanding some of the race caliber materials that are put in this. I think that the Lightstrike Pro that's in the Boston 13 is a firmer formulation of Lightstrike Pro than we see in other shoes like the Adidas Pro 3 or in the Evo SL. I feel like those are spongier, both more cushioned, but also more responsive versions of Lightstrike Pro. I feel like the Lightstrike Pro that's in the Boston 13 isn't quite deflecting as much. It's a bit too firm for my easy efforts, and I'm not getting a speed bump in exchange for that firmness when I'm trying to pick up the pace. So it feels to me like it's a little bit firm for no reason. And because the Lightstrike is also a relatively firm formulation of EVA, I really don't think that we need the energy rods in this shoe, or I don't think the energy rods are really doing all that much. And so with the Lightstrike foam that is a little bit on the firm side, and the Lightstrike Pro that is a little bit on the firm side, and the inclusion of the energy rods, which for me don't really seem to be doing much, but for other runners could serve a very useful stabilization benefit, I feel like the shoe is designed more for runners who want a little bit more stability and who also may be bigger, taller, who are putting more into the shoe with each step than I would be putting when I run in the Boston 13. Now, at this point of the video, before I go any further, I feel like I need to talk about what the Boston is, or what I think the Boston should be. I think that the shoe that's named after the Boston Marathon, which is kind of like the most important race that exists for a lot of road runners out there. I'm not saying it's the most important road race that exists out there. I'm saying for a lot of people, it is the most important road race for them. And so I think that if you're going to name a shoe after that race, that shoe has to be something special. And so for me, I've always understood the Boston as being the shoe that people did a lot of really big workouts in, if not also being the shoe that they raced Boston in. And so in the time before everything went to carbon plates, and before we got the Adios Pro series of shoes, the Boston was the shoe that a lot of people, serious runners, were using to run the Boston Marathon. And so when I look at what the Boston is, and for me, the peak years of Boston were like 7, 8, and 9, I feel like those shoes in my mind were tempo shoes, at least in the way that I would categorize shoes today. It's a shoe that you could use for big workouts, for long runs. You could maybe use it for some daily training, but primarily the idea was when you put these on, you're going to be running faster than on your regular everyday easy run. And on the one hand, it's easy to look at those and say those were perhaps kind of like a function of their time. They were a lot lower to the ground, shorter stack height shoes compared to what we have now. And if we brought that in now, I'd absolutely hate it because I love big, tall, squishy shoes. But I think that in the modern era currently, there are shoes that I think would make for really wonderful modern interpretations of what the Boston would be. And those are some of my favorite tempo shoes, like perennially. So like the Deviate Nitro 3 was my shoe of the year last year. The Deviate Nitro 2 is my shoe of the year before that. The Endorphin Speed 5 and 4 were some of my favorite tempo shoes. I love what those shoes are like. And both the Endorphin Speed series and the Deviate Nitro series, I think, are great examples. They're both very different, but they're both great examples of shoes that can be used for big, tough marathon workouts, can be used as marathon racers, and they're shoes that I frequently recommend to people if they don't want to be in carbon-plated shoes. And they're also shoes that can be used for some daily training miles as well. And I feel like that fits with kind of the definition of not only tempo shoe, but also of what I knew the Boston to be and what I keep hoping every year the Boston is going to be. But instead we're getting something very different. And so that's where I'm constantly having a lot of friction with the Boston, is because I don't really think of this shoe, this Boston, as the shoe that a lot of people that are training to run the Boston Marathon every year, I don't think this is a shoe that a large number of people are reaching for when they're doing some big workouts as they get ready for the Boston Marathon. What Adidas has been giving us in the last few iterations of the Boston is a shoe that is definitely just a daily trainer and getting bigger and bigger. In some years, I've called it Adidas's best max cushion shoe. In other years, I've proposed it as an alternative to the Primex as long run shoe. What Adidas has been doing with the Boston has been kind of filling the gap that Ultra Boost leaves empty. I think it's also been a few years now since the Ultra Boost has been a shoe that serious runners gravitate towards. It has kind of gone a little bit too far down the hype beast route, and it's lost touch with, I think, its original running roots, which if that's the direction it wants to go, if it just wants to be an Adidas version of a Vapor Max, then that's fine. But in its space, there needs to be something, and I feel like Adidas could have done a lot of things, but what they're choosing to do is put the Boston to plug that hole. And I feel like that's where we're getting a lot of problems. So we're getting kind of a runner's version of the Ultra Boost in the form of the Boston, and that's just super annoying for anyone who cares either about the Boston shoe or the Boston Marathon. Now, before we wrap up the video, let's take a moment to zoom out and see where the Boston 13 fits within a broader Adidas lineup. Now, whenever I take a look at a brand, I like to start with the daily trainer. Adidas has multiple, but for today, let's start with the Adizero SL version 2. Now, this is a shoe that you could use for most of your runs, most of your days. It's got Light Strike Pro and Light Strike, very much like the Boston 13, but there is no energy rods in this shoe. It is a lighter and more nimble shoe, and I think that best way to use this as a daily trainer would be for some of your shorter daily training runs, or for your shorter, maybe there's some pace changes in it, there's some speed in there, kind of daily training runs. Because for anything where you're going to be on your feet a little bit longer, that's where I feel like ideally the Boston 13 comes in. So kind of as a long run shoe, or as a shoe that you're going to be in for a longer period of time, I feel like the Boston 13 is a much more comfortable option than the Adizero SL2 would be. Now, let's say you do have a workout, the Boston 13, if it's working for you, can certainly be it. But I think for some speedier stuff, if I'm doing like mile repeats or some 800 meter repeats, I'd want to reach for something a little bit more aggressive and a lot lighter. This is the Takumi Sen 11. It's all Light Strike Pro, and it has Energy Rods 2.0 in it. And I feel like the Energy Rods here make a lot of sense in keeping that shoe nice and snappy. And then the racing option for you would be the Adios Pro 4, which is that shoe that first brought us the light traction outsole. It also has energy rods in it, and it has an updated version of Light Strike Pro, and this would be the racing shoe for you if you are including the Boston 13 in your lineup. And I think this is one possible rotation that you could set up with Adidas if you're looking to feature the Boston 13 as part of your regular routine. Now, of course, for all of these shoes, there are alternatives. Let's again start with the daily trainer. I think a lot of you have been enjoying, as have I, the Evo SL. And I think the way that this would fit in, it would be an alternative to the Adizero SL2. It wouldn't fit in as like a fifth shoe, although if you really wanted to, go for it and you could put it in as a fifth shoe. But I think of it more as an alternative to the Adizero SL2. This is using all Lightstrike Pro and there are no energy rods in this one. I think there is a little bit of a shank in here to keep things from getting a little bit too squirrely, but it's a really fun shoe that you could use for a variety of types of runs, both going faster or slower. It can even kind of obviate the need for some of these two shoes because it kind of bleeds into both of these two categories as well, because it can go fast, but it can also go long. And then as an alternative to the Boston 13, if the Boston 13 really isn't speaking to you, then I think currently the alternative would be the Ultra Boost 5. And as much as I said that the Ultra Boost maybe has lost its way a little bit, I feel like this one has become much more runnable. A lot of the same offerings that, or a lot of the same headline benefits that the Boston 13 can deliver. And then with the Takumi Sen, this is technically a 5K, 10K racing shoe and it's priced accordingly. So if you wanted to save a couple of bucks, you could switch out the Adios 9. It is another shoe that has all Lightstrike Pro, but there are no energy rods in it. So as either a cost saving measure, or maybe you're more old school and just don't like any of this plastic stuff in your shoes, the Adios 9 could be a really fun option. And then in contrast to the cost saving of the Adios 9, there's a way we can get much more expensive with the racing shoes. And instead of the Adios Pro 4, we could reach for the Adios Pro Evo version 2. This is a $500, basically a concept car. It has a new kind of Lightstrike Pro. I believe this year they're calling it Lightstrike Pro Evo to talk about how advanced this foam is. It's ultra lightweight and it is a very fast shoe. So this is a complete alternative lineup that you could be running in Adidas as well, which is an example of the vast variety of options that Adidas provides to people of a variety of different preferences. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some of the alternatives. The Adidas Boston 13 is a great iterative update for those of you who love the Boston 12. It's leaner, it's meaner, it's all around a bit better. However, if you're like me and miss the Bostons of old, I think it's time we all come to terms with the fact that Adidas just isn't interested in making that kind of tempo shoe anymore. My bigger, taller friends, though, should definitely be looking at this one, because if you're the kind of person who's normally blasting through some of the foams of, say, the Evo SL, I think you're going to find the Boston 13 to be a very reliable daily workhorse. This shoe comes in at $160, and I feel like that's a touch expensive for what you're getting here. The Evo SL, after all, is all Lightstrike Pro, and that one comes in at $150. I feel like a Lightstrike Pro, Lightstrike dual density foam system should come in a little bit cheaper. If you're looking to save a couple of bucks, you can maybe look for some discounts on last year's Boston 12. I think that shoe would also serve you very well if you're liking what the Boston 13 has to offer. But I think you're gonna have a hard time finding in your size, so you're probably looking at full retail for the Boston 13. Now, let's take a look though at some of the competition to see what it has to offer. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in my review of the Boston 13 is that I don't think that it needs to have the Energy Rods 2.0. I feel like it's holding that shoe back. So while there are many shoes that I think are viable alternatives to the Boston 13, I'm gonna give you two that do not use carbon plates or plastic plates in them at all, that I think are doing what the Boston 13 does and doing it a little bit better. The first one that I'm going to talk about comes from across the street from Adidas in Herzogenaurach, and that's from Puma. This is the Magnify Nitro 3. This is an all PIBA shoe with a max cushion level stack height and a much more padded upper. So this is more squarely in the max cushion or daily trainer category of shoes. But I feel like when it comes to daily training miles that I want to be comfortable and peppy in, I've been very excited every time I get to reach for this shoe. It's not the fastest shoe in my lineup, so if I had to do a workout, it's not the shoe that I would reach for, but personally for me, the Boston isn't that shoe either, so I don't really consider that to be a negative for the Magnify. That shoe also comes in at $160 though, and I feel like that $160 is a pretty good price for what you're getting. Now, the next shoe is going to be a lot more expensive than the Boston, but it's a shoe that I also like a lot more. This one comes from ASICS, and this is the Superblast version 2. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities going on in terms of what they're doing here. There is a race caliber foam up top, a daily training caliber foam on the bottom to help stabilize things. But the difference is that the Superblast does not have any sort of plate or shank or plastic elements in it, whereas the Boston 13 does. And I think the way that the Superblast handles that is by geometry. It has a much wider base, so there's more shoe to land on. So if you're landing a little bit sideways, or if your foot is caving in a little bit, there's just more shoe to help you resist some of that unwanted motion. And so it's kind of stable without having any stabilizing elements put in the shoe. And so the foams get to shine just a little bit more. I've had a lot of fun running in this shoe, both for daily training miles, long run miles especially, and for picking up the pace from time to time as well. So I feel like it's checking a lot of the boxes of both new and old Boston and doing both of those kinds of jobs very well. This shoe has been one of my favorite shoes in the past couple of years, but you are going to be paying a hefty price for it because that shoe comes in at $200. So those are my thoughts on the Boston 13 and some of the competition. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live streams that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging here all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?